Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Elisa Bunton. I am the AVP of Community Affairs here at Illinois Institute of Technology. On behalf of Illinois Tech, Organic Oneness, and the Museum of Tolerance, we proudly welcome you to this conversation with Dr. Terrence Roberts. Dr. Roberts will share what's on his heart for the first 20 minutes, followed by a conversation, and then ultimately a question and answer session with you, the audience. You are kindly asked to mute your microphone and type any questions that you have in the chat. We will definitely get to them. I am proud to introduce to you Dr. Terrence James Roberts. Dr. Roberts made history as a member of the Little Rock Nine. He is one of the 9 African-American students who desegregated the all-white Little Rock Central High School in 1957, while the entire world watched them brave constant intimidation and threats from those who stood in opposition to integration. Dr. Roberts is a graduate of California State University at Los Angeles and UCLA. He obtained his Ph.D. in psychology from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, Illinois. Today, Dr. Roberts is the CEO of Terrence J. Roberts and Associates, a management consultant firm devoted to fair and equitable practices. He is a civil rights activist, diversity consultant, and frequent keynote speaker. Dr. Roberts is also the recipient of the Congressional Gold Medal, the United States' highest civilian honor. Dr. Roberts' memoir, A Study in Institutional Racism, is titled Lessons from Little Rock. He is also the author of Simple, Not Easy: Reflections on Community, Social Responsibility, and Tolerance. Dr. Roberts.
Wow, thank you. Sounds very good.
You are very good.
Who I have been. At any rate, one of the reasons why we have structured it this way, I get to talk first, and then we talk together for most of the time, because as it turns out, I will share with you things that I think I already know. I don't learn from that process of me talking. My learning happens when we talk together, because you share with me what you know, and together we leave this place, perhaps with a fund of information that is much more salient. In any case, we'll see how that goes. My story starts 80 years ago in Little Rock, Arkansas. I came on the scene in December of 1941, and immediately I recognized, because something in the air told me things were awry. It seemed that things were not quite level or plumb. I didn't know what. I didn't know much of anything. My main quest was to assuage hunger pangs and get rid of my dirty diaper, as far as I can tell. But later on, family members helped me to fill in the blanks, and I realized that I was lucky. I landed well. I landed in the laps of people who really loved me. They cared about me, and they sought the best for me at every possible opportunity. Now, that's an important thing, because some of us don't have that kind of start. It's unfortunate, but it's true. I remember reading a book many years ago, the title of which was The Throwaway Children, written by Lisa Richetti. I'll never forget her, retired juvenile court judge. And she had seen and heard about so many awful stories having to do with kids who literally were thrown away. And I didn't believe it at first. I said, how could this happen? How could people truly do this to children? Which eventually led me into social work, where I thought I could find my space and operate from that base. I was quickly disillusioned, and for a number of reasons, won't get into that. But in any case, there I was in Little Rock. Now, as soon as I acquired the power of speech, I began to question people about the state of affairs. What's going on? How did this stuff develop? See, because by then, I not only sensed, but I knew from my own observation that things were a mess. Many people were unwilling to talk to me. In fact, some people warned me with a caution, boy, don't bring that stuff up. You want to get us all killed? And I thought, wow, this is serious stuff. I'd better back off and not alienate these folks. So I continued my research in a rather clandestine way, and I found out that it was possible to get all the facts one needed simply by reading. I read voraciously. And by the way, you can do the same thing. It's all written down. You can pick up any history book. It doesn't matter how terrible it is. You can't avoid the facts if you are any kind of a historian. So you can weed through the junk and get the nuggets that you need. I was frightened at first. I used to look over my shoulder thinking the Gestapo were right at the door because I shouldn't have this information. This was probably all classified. But no, it's there. It's still there in library shelves all over the country. What I found out was that the story they had been telling me in many ways in school was wrong. No, the mythological truth, as they called it, well, that's what I called it. The mythological truth did not correctly identify who we have become as Americans. I was able to piece things together. And by the way, that's an ongoing process. I'm still doing the same thing. I recently read a fantastic book. It's called Democracy in Chains by Nancy MacLean. You might want to put that on your reading list because she's a wonderful researcher and writes very well. And the stuff she writes about is as startling as the stuff I read when I was a kid. Same stuff, by the way. At any rate, I got to school. I knew school was in my future because my parents were very keen on this notion of education. More than that, people in my community seemed to be enthusiastic about it as well. Everywhere I turned, it seemed there was an adult in my face. Boy, get your education. And I heard that over and over. And even though the grammar was suspect, I got the real message. So I was prepared for first grade. What I wasn't prepared for was a first grade teacher who really gave me a boost. She spoke to all of us 6-year-olds in a very serious voice. You kids must take on executive responsibility for learning. You have to become CEO of your own independent learning enterprises. That was magic. I felt compelled to take that in, absorb it at bone marrow level, and act on it as well, which I did. I established the Terrence Roberts Learning Academy in September of 1947. And that agency has been active since. No breaks in service, no late fees, none of that stuff. Why? Because it's important. I can't stress enough the importance of learning because as humans, we can only do one thing. We get to choose. We get to choose from among the available options in the universe. Question, how many options do you know? If you're like me, it's very few. My main quest on a daily basis is to increase my number of options. Because when you have options open to you, you have opportunity to choose something that's going to change the pathway you're on. You may be on a pathway headed over the cliff or down a waterfall. But if you have other options, you don't have to worry about those things. This woman was wonderful. She was one of a cadre of teachers in that all-black school system I attended from first grade through 10th grade in Little Rock. Tell you a little bit about that. A lot of people think that because we were in a segregated system, notorious in terms of governments not providing enough funds for what we were doing, and yet we had a cadre of teachers who not only were well prepared, well trained, well educated, but filled with enthusiasm about what they could share with us kids. I don't know if they ever talked about it among themselves, but collectively they approached us with this notion that you are worth more than you think. You have a lot to contribute to this society and other places, and it's important that you prepare yourself well in advance. Now, Arkansas, perhaps like some other states in the Union, had these rules of segregation, right? Black people could not get educations at the higher levels beyond, public school system. They wanted to go to university. There were no all-black universities available for a long time. There were later. But the state of Arkansas had to pay for them to get higher degrees, masters and doctorates in other places where they would accept black students. It's one of the artifacts of this whole segregation business. So they did. They paid the money. Some of these folk came back to Little Rock, found out that they couldn't get jobs in any of their chosen fields, but they could teach. So we had the best and the brightest. We had teachers who truly knew what they were talking
not
about,
in this like
and they shared it freely
always
with us.
customers, right? Your
And
managers are focused. They have so many things coming at them.
I don't know who's interfering with us. Is that one of those bombing things? Anyway, if it is, it'll be the first time. But
It is not a
so,
bomb. Sorry, somebody took themselves off of mute. I fixed that.
okay. In any case, we benefited tremendously. My first grade teacher was followed up by the second grade teacher, the third grade teacher, the fourth grade teacher. By the fourth grade, I was expert. I knew what I was doing. With, well, you get what's happening here. Fourth graders are likely to do that, but I think there was some validity in it. I knew what I was doing. I was listening very carefully. In fact, the fourth grade teacher, and she seemed to be sort of an outlier with some of the others, she tried to cram down our skulls something called manifest destiny. I don't know if you're familiar with that concept, but it's another part of that mythological truth we're talking about. Manifest destiny goes something like this. God himself ordained that these folk who were from England or other countries could come here of their own free will and occupy this land that we are on from the Atlantic to the Pacific and get rid of all the people here if they didn't like them, but to establish themselves eventually as Americans. That didn't wash with me. I'd read other things. I knew other interpretations of that whole sort of reality. So, but I just say I didn't confront her. See, I'd also learned that in public schools or any other bureaucratic institutions, you run risk if you confront without being prepared to back it up with something. And I didn't have much as a fourth grader. So I didn't confront this woman, but I filed it away for future reference. What if I bump into other people who try to confront me with stuff that makes no sense? I need to have a response for that. And so it was that I was able, pardon me, to get through all of this business. And then in 1954, something rather magical happened. The United States Supreme Court, not a body accustomed to being on the side of Black people in this country, not at all. But in 1954, this court ruled unanimously to get rid of segregation in public schools. Now, I read that as they have now overturned Plessy. The Plessy decision, which had been rendered in 1896, established separate but equal. That is, Americans would live in relation to each other based on racial group membership, and that there would be one racial group at the top of the hierarchy, and all the others would be listed down below. Black people were on the bottom. They overturned that. So I concluded that the Supreme Court, the law of this country, the Constitution itself, was in support of Terry Roberts. I now had the freedom to attend any high school that was publicly operated as long as it was available and close by my criteria. Central High School was 6 blocks away from where I lived. In fact, I passed by that school on a daily basis because I had to ride a bus downtown and transfer to another bus to take me on the east side of town to get to the school for all Black school. That made no sense. By the way, the government, the school board in Little Rock didn't pay our bus fare to make that happen. That's an extra cost. So I was all set when the school board decided that they wanted to obey this edict of desegregation and put together a plan. My hand was among the first up to volunteer. Oh yeah, I'm ready. As it turned out, about 150 kids volunteered. Oh, that number you'll find in history books to be very fluid. Don't worry about it. It was a large number. Okay, so we all went home from assemblies. It happened at 2 schools, by the way. There was one high school for Black kids and one middle school for Black kids. All Black kids in Little Rock went to one of those 2 schools at some point if they stayed with public school education. At any rate, we went home and informed our parents that we had volunteered to participate in this desegregation experiment. You could hear the parental vetoes being exercised all over town. That number went from 150 to 10 in a nanosecond. Why? Because a lot of parents knew without any doubt that their kid might wind up in the gutter of Little Rock someplace with his or her blood flowing down in the street. Well, my parents didn't say no. In fact, when I told them that I had volunteered, they very quickly said, "We will support your decision 100%. And if you get up there and it's too hot, it's too rough, you want to quit, we will support your decision to quit 100%. I had the best of all possible worlds. And I knew in a flash that this was important because I could stay or I could leave, but without any fear of losing one iota of parental esteem. That was vital. In fact, I had to use that a lot because did I want to quit? Yes. How often? Every second of every day. I had to fight off that thought of quitting because it was not easy, folk. I can talk about it now with some aplomb and some calmness, but I tell you, I was afraid. I'd never been that afraid in my life. I thought, even if I thought about it, which I don't even think I did, but if I had thought about it, it would have been that if you were that afraid, you would probably just keel over and die. How could you possibly continue to live with that level of fright? But again, something very important happened along the way. My focus on learning kicked in, and I began to focus on what was really happening. And then I had this epiphany. It's not the other people in the mob, the screaming mob, the students who are trying to kill me, who are making me afraid. I'm choosing fear. See, back to choice. I was choosing fear because I didn't have any other options, right? Oh, so I woke up. I said, okay. So I had a long, serious talk with fear. We came to an understanding. Fear is very formidable. He didn't leave, but he was willing to go with me to Central and not to bug me too much. That was good. And so I stayed. I chose to stay. I mean, there was one serious moment. I actually visited my older sister, who's 2 years older. She was already in college. She was going to college down in Huntsville, Alabama. I stayed over the Thanksgiving weekend with her. And those 4 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, those were magical days.
You guys hear me? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Oliver.
Hello.
Okay.
Sorry. He's my friend. He has some technical problems.
That's all right.
Sorry, please continue.
I'm going to ask everyone to mute themselves. I have muted you, and you should stay muted.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, madam. Sorry. I will not do it again. Sorry.
Okay, I get it. So I was there for 4 days in Huntsville, Alabama, nobody trying to kill me. And when I got back home late Sunday evening, I had a serious decision to make. And I don't recall exactly the thought process, but by Monday morning, I was trudging back up to Central. And from that point on, the thoughts of wanting to quit rather diminished. Interestingly enough, at the same time as that was happening, one of our group got kicked out of school, February of '58, and the violence increased. Little cards were circulated all over that campus. 1 down, 8 to go. What had happened was our colleague, Minnie Jean, had been accosted and, beaten. And she resisted responding for a long time. But one day she said, okay, that's it. So she began to fight back. And the school, in its infinite wisdom, decided to expel her. They didn't expel the white students who were fighting with her, but they expelled her. And so they figured with 1 down, 8 to go, they could increase the pressure on the remaining 8 and perhaps create a situation where all of us would be expelled. Well, we simply thought it through and said, okay, we just have to recommit ourselves to nonviolence and move on, which we did. And that wasn't easy, but by then I had dealt with my fear, so I was able to absorb a lot of stuff. Now, in the interest of being candid, we were very young, and our understanding of nonviolence was embryonic. So there were occasions where things happened. We don't need to get into that. But several of us have written about it. If you're interested, you can find out more details. In any case, we got through that year, 7 of us, and we're ready to go back. I say 7 because Minnie Jean got kicked out and Ernie graduated. So that meant that there were 7 of us. We let the governor know that we were coming back for round 2, something he didn't really want to hear. How could this be? We thought we had done enough to you to dissuade you from even trying to come back on this campus. No, we will be back. So he fretted and fumed all summer long. And I think, I have no evidence for this, but I think it was late August before he came up with a plan. As the governor of the state, the highest office in the state of Arkansas, his plan was to shut down all public high schools in Little Rock. Brilliant, right? Oh, excellent move. I don't know if the governor realized at the time that by closing the schools down to keep the black kids out, he would also keep the white kids out. I don't know. I can't vouch for his mentality or his IQ. My hunch is he's among a lot of politicians because in this country, to run for a public office, you do not have to give evidence that you have a valid IQ in the first place. So that may be something we label him with. But I don't know. So, but as a consequence of the school's closure, rather than languish in Little Rock, wondering what next, I accepted an invitation from relatives who happened to live in Los Angeles. I moved there in August of '58, enrolled in LA High, persuaded my entire family to move from Little Rock to LA, and they did by December. By December '58, all of us were Californians. We had turned in our Little Rock visas. Probably should have burned them at the border or something, but nothing so dramatic. We just got rid of them, vowing never to step foot in Little Rock, which didn't last because I've been back to Little Rock many, many times since. In fact, in 1992, no, it was 88, yeah, 1988, the Little Rock School Board called me. They wanted me to become their official desegregation consultant. Can you imagine? Now, that's ironic on many levels. This is 1988. This is not 1957. And they're still dealing with this stuff, right? So I go for an interview. The superintendent explains what they want to do. I think he's lying. So what do? I tell him what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that you're lying, I say. He says, no, we're committed. He laughed a lot. And I said, I don't believe you. But here's what's going to happen. I'm going to take the job. You're going to find out what I'm doing at some point, at which point you'll probably fire me. He laughed again. Oh, no, we're committed, right? Took him 4 years. In 92, that's the year I left. He fired me in 92. Took him 4 years. He was in the Faubus camp. Well, the thing is, Little Rock is simply a prototype for this entire country. There are some people who divide the country up into geographical spaces, north, east, south, west, etc. None of that's truly valid. We're pretty much all one functioning country that is, in real terms, the South. Why do I say that? Because if you live in the continental U.S. and you live south of Canada, you are in the South, folk. And it doesn't matter where you are. You could be in Montana, Utah, Baltimore, well, wherever you are, you're in the South. And that's something else you can find out just by reading. You see, politically, we have become Southernized. Why? Because folk in the Deep South, as it's sometimes called, have been successful in gerrymandering the voting districts and putting people in office repeatedly until they gain enough seniority to head committees. And this has been going on for centuries. And they have been successful. One of the most successful things they have done recently is to put this guy Trump in office, who was able then to fill the Supreme Court with like-minded folk. All this stuff is not new. It's been going on forever. What's interesting to me is most of us as Americans let it happen. We don't say a thing about it. I can't tell you how many groups I've talked to who will question me as I speak. Are you allowed to say this stuff in public, they say? Well, of course I am. Why? Because I'm speaking my truth. And I think sometimes what they're doing is a self-assessment. Would I be able to speak the same truth as Terry Roberts? I don't think so, is the conclusion for some of them. Many times people have come to me during the breaks, during lunch or some other break, and where they'll speak quietly, and we'll have meaningful conversation. But in the group, well, they won't say anything. But I'm hoping this is a different group. I hope today you'll be able to speak your truth, because again, I need to learn from you. Like I said, I don't know everything. I don't know much, really. And that's why I'm still reading voraciously. Yeah. By the way, I just, a couple of weeks ago, I finished this amazing biography written by Pernell Joseph about Malcolm X. Now, if you've read the autobiography of Malcolm X, that's one thing, but Malcolm left a lot of stuff out. So pick up Joseph's book, and read that. I think you'll find it fascinating. Malcolm's a very interesting character too, because he sort of represents a whole lot of people in this country who sort of sleepwalk their way through the early part of life, but then they come to an awakening, begin to understand. That's why Malcolm was killed. He was assassinated because he was finally finding out what was truly going on and was willing to speak loudly about it. Same thing happened to Martin Luther King, the man we are commemorating very soon. Because you see, as long as Martin Luther King was willing to run around talking about we shall overcome, the powers that be said, oh, it's fine, we can absorb that. But when he began to question the economics and the wealth divide, and especially when he came out against the Vietnam War, and you can't do that and maintain any kind of safety in this country. If you don't follow the company line, you're in the crosshairs of somebody, and that somebody may very well be a government operative. We have to consider this very carefully. In any case, I'm going to quit now, and I think it's been more than 20 minutes. That's all right. We'll make up for lost time. So are there, well, the chat only says there's 2 things. And are there any questions in there, by the way? At any rate, if you have a question, and you do have questions, I know that. There's no question about it. We all have questions. Fact is, some of us are unwilling to speak our questions aloud for various and sundry reasons, some of which has to do with the fact that you don't want to seem like you're not wise. I was going to say something else. But in any case, it doesn't matter. You are who you are. And you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to apologize for it. Just speak the truth, because it's in this dialogue that we all learn, right? Okay, so whoever is up, you're on.
All right, so I've got a couple of questions that may serve as a springboard. And again, our viewing audience, please feel free to type your questions in the chat. So thank you for talking about being a 6-year-old Terry Roberts and being the CEO, executive of your own education. In your book, there are a couple of other ages that seem to have been quite pivotal for you. So the next age that I'd like you to tell us a little bit about, actually 2 ages, 13 and 14. So at age 13, Brown versus the Board of Ed had been struck down for a year. Who were you at that age, and what did you think that meant for you? And then tell us about the following year. Actually, tell us about Crystal Berger, and then tell us about age 14 and the impact that Emmett Till's death had on you.
Yes, absolutely. I'll start with Emmett Till because that was a very traumatic thing. This happened in Mississippi. Mississippi is geographically contiguous to Arkansas. And my first thought when I heard about that monstrous murder, what if persons responsible for killing Emmett Till crossed the border into Arkansas? Would they be able to find Terry Roberts? That was a real fear. He and I were the very same age. I couldn't believe that this had happened. And yet, I should have known through my own study. I mean, I'd known about cases very similar to that. I mean, I had already read about what happened to Leo Frank in the very town where I live right now, Marietta, Georgia. And that's a story some of you may find useful to look up too. Happened in the 20s. But Leo Frank was, accused of something he didn't do, obviously, and he was killed viciously by a mob. So again, the fear thing happened. But it was also during that same time when I went into this local hamburger joint, the Crystal Burger. Now, the rules of segregation meant that for Black people, you had no real standing in the Crystal Burger, except to stand up. You couldn't sit down. You could buy food, but you had to take it out to go. I knew the drill. I'd been there. And at that time, I was actually eating that kind of stuff, burgers and fries and that all kind of stuff that I've since found is not very good for you. But I went in there, and it was during the summer. I ordered my burger and fries and probably a malt, all to go. Now, the restaurant at that point was not very well populated, I suppose is a good word. Not many people in there. No customers to speak of, really. Few here and there. But all these empty seats. Bar, the stools, the tables, chairs. So without thinking, I sat down on one of the bar stools to wait, at which point everything in the Crystal Burger stopped. It was as if someone had paused on the VCR, hamburgers in mid-flip, just waiting. And I said, uh-oh, to myself, I have committed a cardinal sin. I should not sit down. So I quickly jumped up, but because at that point I began to feel these massive feelings of anger and upset and distress and a whole lot of other things, I ran out of there crying. I ran all the way home. It wasn't that far. I ran home. My mom was there. She saw me. Didn't say anything, typical of her, because she allowed us kids to process whatever was going on with us. And then we would talk about it if we so chose with her, at which point she would hear us and listen without judgment, which was wonderful. I knew all of this. So eventually we did talk about it and we had a conversation. But at that point, I could feel something inside of me had snapped, some connection that would no longer work if I were to live by the rules of segregation. Couldn't do it anymore. That's what I told myself. And so in my own way, as a very young kid, I started doing that. Had to be very careful, obviously. But the thought process is important. You know, who you think you are and what you think you can do is vital, because if you feel boxed in, you are boxed in. If you feel free, then you can be free to a certain realistic extent, yes. But the mind is a wonderful, expansive space. You can move around and be in several places in a given day. Again, that's why reading is so important. You can be transported to these places like magic. In any case, that's some of what was going on in my young life, which prepared me to say yes without hesitation when the opportunity came to go to Central. No, there was no question about it. In fact, the count was off by one. I had both hands up.
So that kind of takes me to another question that I want to ask you. Even though you enthusiastically raised both hands up, what was your parents' reaction when you came home and said, "Hey, mom, dad, guess what happened today at school?"
Oh no, I mentioned that.
Okay.
They said we will support you 100%. No question, no question. You see, because they had prepared us, all seven of us, really. Well, I'm being I don't know what's the word for that, because my younger sister was actually born in February of 1957, so she didn't really have much going. But you know, you get the point, right? She
Got
would
it.
have if we stayed in Little Rock. But yeah, they were very much, and I think because of who they were, both my parents had been born in Little Rock in the same year. They were the same age. They were born in 1920. And if you know anything about 1919, 1920, those 2 years particularly, the days, over 700 days of lynching that was unprecedented in world history, really. I mean, black people were killed at will everywhere, not just in the deep South, by the way, all over the place. It was sport. And you can read about people having picnics, coming out to watch a black person being hung and then roasted, and then taking souvenirs, fingers and toes and all kinds of things. Well, uh, it's really frightening now even to think about that we have that kind of history. And then you think about people who grew up with that kind of history being alive and well in the household. This was quite true of a lot of the kids at Central. You know, they were they were really outraged that black kids were in this school where white kids were supposed to be, but black kids were not. They couldn't deal with it. They couldn't deal with it. And they seemed to have one option, and that was to kill us. They really needed more options, honestly, for my sake.
Indeed, indeed, they did. In your book, you talked about your interactions with the NAACP, Daisy Bates, Martin Luther King Jr., but in particular, you call out Reverend James Lawson and Glenn Smiley. Those two individuals help teach you and the others principles of nonviolence, much the way they had with Dr. King. Can you tell us what their messaging was and how you were able to, internalize that and then actually use those trainings once you entered the school?
Yes, good point. These two men were, as you said, cohorts of Dr. King, and they'd helped him come to a greater, a more in-depth understanding of nonviolence as a technique. And they saw what was happening in Little Rock and came, sat down with a group of us and explained what nonviolence was. And it was a very short tutorial, But we seem to be, attentive. And they said to us, we're very concerned because you're all so young. And if you don't really absorb this at the bone level, the bone marrow level, you may forget and respond with violence. And that could really turn into something very devastating for you and other people. Are you sure you want to do this? And they said, here's what we'll do. We want you to go home and think about it. And here's what I want you to think about. In order to really be nonviolent, you have to love your enemy. You have to truly love your enemy. And to the extent that we understood the concept of enemy, as well as the concept of love, we took that home and we all thought about it. We don't know what we thought about it because we never discussed it together. We all came back and said, yes, we can do this. I think in retrospect, it was probably just the enthusiasm because we were ready. I think all 7 of us had similar ideas about this was a time when things needed to change because we knew that we were people who could learn and wanted to learn. And there was no need to have these barriers in our way. See, I think collectively, we all thought that these laws for segregation were illegal, immoral, unrealistic, a lot of things. There was no question about that. And so nonviolence, yes, let's put that in the bag too and roll with it. For me, especially though, it had a special resonance because I've never liked fighting. I witnessed some fighting growing up. I was actually attacked even before I got to Central. So I had this healthy resistance to even being around fighting. So when it came to be nonviolence as opposed to responding with violence, it was not an issue for me. Oh yeah, I can do that. I can be nonviolent. In fact, at this point in time, I'm now 80 years old. I am 99.9% nonviolent. I'm working on that other 1%. I don't know if I'll get there. I reserve a part of me simply because I haven't figured out a better thing to do. That's why choice is so important. You see? What do I mean by that? Well, there are at least 6 people in my world that if either one of you harm one of them, that's your last day on earth. That's my 1%. But I keep myself out of those situations as much as possible, so I don't even have to go there. But it's important to know that about yourself. Knowing that about myself keeps me safe, keeps you safe. It's an important thing, this knowledge.
Understood. Thank you so much. You talked about love and the importance of truly loving people. For me, love and spirituality are somewhat intertwined. In your book, you said in response to the terrorism that you experienced on a daily basis, you recalled several stanzas of the poem Invictus to kind of squash those feelings. And I'll read the lines in particular. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced or cried aloud. Under bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody, but not bowed. So tell us about the role spirituality played in your life at this time. And for those who haven't read the book, Dr. Roberts defines spirituality as the desire to know God.
Well, my spirituality was very embryonic at that point. I grew up as a church-going person, so I was exposed to a lot of important information very early on. And I read the Bible, and I continued to read the Bible, and I found in it messages that were very, very important. What I didn't find in church, particularly, was a company of people who shared that enthusiasm. There was much more an adherence to rules and regulations and worry about an avenging God. And I was picking up the messages that the God we were serving was a loving God. So I had to put some space between me and a lot of people who claimed to be, part of this whole spiritual growth, if you will. Invictus helped me. It was not, as I figured out later, a very spiritual poem, but it served a purpose. I grew beyond it. But I must say, I still memorize, I know it. I can memorize it, I can recite it without missing a beat since I did it so much. But it was powerful. And I've used poetry of all kinds, poems other people have written, my own poems. And I found in poetry something also magical because you see, good poems, good poetry elicits from the reader emotions that have nothing to do with the poet, him or herself. I remember being a part of a writer's workshop early on in my life in California. Small group of writers. We met on a weekly basis, once a week. We met together and we shared aloud what we had written the week before. And we got critical input from the group. And the group was really tough. And they told the truth. They spoke truth to you. If what you had written was trash, they told you that's trash. No condemnation, no judgment, just this is the reality, okay? But if you've written something very good, they would tell you that too. But it didn't matter what they said, but what mattered was their willingness to care enough to confront. They cared enough about me. We cared enough about each other that we were willing to confront. And see, when you confront, it's not always nice and pretty. Sometimes it's, trashy, ugly, because that's what's going on. And we have to speak that truth. For instance, I was remarking to my wife just the other day, a couple of days ago, we saw in the New York Times an article, the heading article said, this woman wrote a question. She wanted advice. She was planning a family outing. They were going away and they were going to stay someplace. Question, should she invite her daughter's married boyfriend to go with them? And I thought, you have to write a question to the New York Times to figure that one out? But it's that sort of thing. You have a standard and that you live by, and you confront those in your world with that. Not in a judgmental way, but you care enough to confront. See, confrontation is not the same as combativeness, or warfare. Confronting is not war or fighting. Confronting is simply speaking a truth that you think the other person might well benefit from hearing. Person who is really good at that is my wife. She knows how to confront, and she is sharp as a tack. So I'm always on my P's and Q's. But it's good, it's helpful. Once I figured out that this was something meant to encourage me rather than I needed to fight, because at that point I was nowhere near 99.9% nonviolent. I made a lot of movement.
Thank you. In the chat, we have some individuals that would like for you to share a suggested reading list. Grant thanks you for mentioning Nancy McLean's book, Democracy in Chains, because it explains a lot of the weird maneuvers that have gone on in the last 40 years. Do you have other books that you would like to recommend for our audience? And before you answer that, Judy asks, what is the name of the author of the biography about Malcolm X that you mentioned?
Pennell, I think it's spelled Pennel. His last name is Joseph, Joseph. But yeah, I have a lot of books to recommend. Probably The Broken Heart of America, written by Walter Johnson. Walter is a professor of history at Harvard or Yale, one of those Ivies. But Walter Johnson, The Broken Heart of America, that's a powerful book. That's one I read recently too, just came out a couple of years ago. And probably, here's what I'll do. Alicia, I will send you, because I have this ongoing annotated bibliography, and I can send that to you and you can dispense it to all and sundry.
I will. Thank you so much. Lester McCarroll says, Dr. Roberts, this country appears to be stuck in an eternal cycle of incremental progress, followed by significant white conservative backlash to roll back or minimize the impact of progress. In fact, we are in a backlash cycle right now. What are the most impactful changes that you've seen since the 50s that have been able to remain or be sustained in spite of these periods of backlash? And there's a follow-up. What would you advise to young leaders to do to spearhead sustainable change?
I have a slightly different take on it, and that is I don't see it so much as a backlash. I see us as having inaugurated this train of thought as early as 1619. And basically, the ideology was this: we are here, the settlers, the colonists, colonialists, said to themselves, we are here to spread out and occupy this land, and we'll do anything we need to do to make it happen, and we will prosper here. See, the goal was to find riches in so many different ways. And through the centuries, this program has been pushed forward. Now, so-called progress has meant a backlash from people of color, pretty much. We've been the backlash. We're saying, no, we protest against this. And we get quickly squashed over and over. So that happens over and over. I think at this point, what we need to do, especially young people, is to start thinking in terms of filling themselves with the information they need, having the knowledge about what has truly happened, so that then they can assess based on what they know about themselves and their abilities and their skills, where they can best be effective in beginning to change what's going on. Now, that's a hard task because the opposition is strong and powerful, especially if you read Nancy McLean's book. You'll see they're playing a very long game, longer than many people think. I go all the way back to 1619, perhaps even before that, because of the mindset of people who colonize other places. America is not the first place to be colonized. Still going on today. Right now, there's a shortage of a lot of precious metals in a lot of African countries, and those countries are under siege because people who want them will do anything to get them. Nothing is off the books in terms of that. So we have to understand that to be a reality. Too many of us, I think, are filled with the notion that it's just a few people who are off center, and that as soon as they get back in line, we'll all be together again. No, never been that. Never been that. We are a functioning group of people. Walter Brueggemann, who's an Old Testament scholar, puts it very succinctly. He says, we live in an extraction economy. Wealthy people are extracting from the poor people every day, every single day. I read about Elon and Jeff, Musk and Bezos. They're earning billions of dollars per hour just because of what they've been able to do. That's extraction to the extreme, but that goes on at smaller levels every day, every day. Poor people are being bled to death in terms of their financial security. And that's a piece of this whole thing. The goal seems to be to die with the most toys. You've heard that old adage, right? But writ large, writ very large. But again, I would say to all of us, we have to know this stuff and we have to believe it before we're able to act, because a lot of us compromise and we don't even realize we're compromising. You can't afford to just go along with the program, In fact, I've had arguments with colleagues who said to me, you can't teach these students this or that. I said, what do you mean? They're not ready for it, they might say. No, that's not the case. A friend of mine called from Connecticut. He wanted to open a private school for young people. And he said, Terry, I want to know, you know about these things. At what point should I teach them about racism? I said, well, who's the youngest kid in your class? He told me. I said, well, that's where you start. You start with the youngest. And then whoever else comes, you start with them. But the point is, you cannot restrict this. You've got to help kids learn. A lot of parents today are saying things like, our kids can't handle it. Part of the reason they can't handle it is parents help them learn how to handle it. They're unwilling to handle it themselves, which then means I have to resort to guerrilla tactics often. I have to send kids home with a list of things to confront their parents with, list of questions. Ask your parents about this. Ask them, what part do you play in this madness? See what happens. Usually the response is to call me with an outraged voice. And that's fine. I don't mind that. I'll listen to people in their outrage. I'll still keep sending the kids home with questions. That's not going to change.
And speaking of outrage, Michelle has a comment about teaching or not teaching critical race theory in the curriculum in Georgia. Her question is, can you comment on what you're seeing regarding critical race theory in education? And are you seeing any evidence of schools including this anytime soon?
I don't think in this country there is evidence that I've seen that people really understand what critical race theory is all about, for one thing. It's just another way of saying we want to speak the truth. And if you look historically, we've done that in many ways. We've sought to bring people to the brink of truth and let them drink and absorb what's there. That's what critical race theory is all about, to explain how it has worked over the centuries. Now, give you an illustration. One of our annual celebration, not annual, but one of our 5 or 10 year celebrations in Little Rock for the Little Rock Nine, we would go down, and a lot of white people in Little Rock would complain that we were going to do this. No, and we don't want any photographs, they would say. And obviously, that was to limit the ability of people to learn who had been doing what. My response was, it's important that we know the truth. What we do with it is what we choose to do with it, but if we don't know the truth, how can we respond to it? You cannot wish it away by not having the photographs. You cannot wish it away by suppressing what's written, which is what a lot of people are suggesting. A lot of people are getting rid of books in schools. What? I heard that. What do you mean getting rid of books? That's the stuff for learning, folks.
Right.
And even if it's a poorly written book, it's important to know that there is such a thing as a poorly written book, and you can see it when you read it. You don't have to worry about it, and you don't run the risk of accepting it as truth or logic because you know in advance. I see where this writer is trying to force us to read something that makes no sense. You need to know about people like that. Maybe then you can write them a letter, the author, and have a chat, have a conversation, see where it goes. Oftentimes, you'll find that the person who allegedly wrote the book is not the author anyway. You think Sarah Palin actually wrote her book? Okay, well, that's just something you have to know in advance, right?
Got it. Our audience wants you to talk more about your experience as a desegregation consultant. And they also want to know, what was it that you finally did, said, or initiated that caused your work in Little Rock to terminate?
Well, I had submitted a proposal to the school board about a year and a half into my work with them. I spent that time to really learn what was going on. And a lot of it was just, reifying what I'd already figured out, but nothing was said, no response. So I got an appointment on local cable TV, local cable television, reported all the school board meetings. So I got a slot on their agenda. The superintendent called me. He says, I see your name on the agenda. What are you going to talk about? I said, I'm going to give an update of my work. Oh, okay, fine. He's fine with that. So I did. I gave an update of what I've been doing. And then I rather casually mentioned this proposal I'd submitted 9 months before. See, in my thinking, 9 months is a proper gestation period. So I thought I should be willing now to bring it to light. So I just outlined what the proposal said on cable TV. And then I went back to my hotel room, at which point my phone was ringing off the hook.
Mm-hmm.
Superintendent and his minions, you can't say that. Well, and then because of that social pressure, they pulled that proposal off the shelf and we began to implement it. And it was at that point that the lights went up and alarm bells were going off. And not long after that, I got the sack. Because basically the proposal said that every single member in this department, this educational department, from the superintendent down to the lowest level employee, needs to go through a process of learning what's truly going on here. Because I was figuring out, I've talked to people. In fact, I tried to get, and I did get finally a cadre of 12 teachers to help me do this program. And it was like pulling teeth to find people who were really able to get what we were trying to do there. But we did. I got 12 people and they got involved and things were moving along. But I knew the end was coming quickly because we were basically bringing a spotlight to stuff that had been covered up a lot. I spent a lot of time in that system. In fact, I visited classes. I was in a fourth grade classroom once, and all of a sudden the doors were burst open and the Gestapo came in, the Gestapo being the school police. They had arms. I mean, they were armed. They said they're coming in to do a spot check for drugs. They had all the fourth graders line up against the wall to be searched. So what did I do? I got up against the wall too. And they said, oh, no, Dr. Roberts, you don't have to. I said, oh, yeah, I do. I've got to do it. So I was searched. And then I went through all of that stuff. They didn't find anything on any of us. We weren't carrying. So I went to the superintendent and I explained all of what had happened. His first words, we have the legal right. We've checked with our attorneys. Well, I knew that. Of course, you got legal cover. CYA to the extreme. But I said, that's not my point. My point is the trauma for fourth graders. Do you have any idea what happens to a fourth grade kid who gets thrown up against the wall in class? And he had no answer for that except, well, would you come in and train our people? Train my people, right? You can't train people who've chosen to live their lives with that sort of thought process. It goes far beyond training. In fact, I've turned down a lot of opportunities to do consulting because I go in and I find out that people aren't really serious. I was called in once to a department at a college. It was a psychology department. Yeah, imagine that. A psychology department. And they wanted help because they needed to get rid of their racist ideology. And they wanted to have me help them figure out how to attract more faculty of color and more students of color. That was what they said.
Okay.
And so I came in and met with them and we had some sessions together. And then I came back and I said, you know what? I need to ask a couple of questions before I move ahead with writing any proposals for you. I said, why do you want to do this? And they looked aghast. Why? Well, obviously, isn't it obvious why I want to do it? No. Would you explain to me why you want to do this? They couldn't. They had, what they really wanted was to look better in the eyes of their colleagues. They wanted to go through some motions. I said, I can't be a part of that. You call me if you're ever ready to do something real. They never call, never heard from them. Which is, and that's typical, a lot of these places. I've actually gone in and I misread the request and I followed through. Then I realized, you should have picked that up. Yeah, I was at the Friends School in DC, Quaker School.
Yeah.
And they called me to do some programs for faculty. And I walked in, I should have gotten a clue right there because in this room where we were, it looked like a library room. But on the walls, they had giant portraits of all of the past headmasters. Take a guess who was on the wall. White men.
White men, yeah.
White men were on the wall. But in the corner on an easel, they had a poster with the words diversity and some other words akin to that on the poster. And so I just posed a question to them. I said, what's the reality? Is it the wall or the easel? What is it? And the faculty were looking a little, worried about their next paycheck. And the headmaster pulled me aside. He said, oh, it's okay. We're going to have you back. We're going to have you back. Well, they never called either. So people will come up to the edge and they'll dip their toe, but then the water doesn't feel right. So they take it back. I understand that because if you buy into the status quo in this country, you're victimized by something so much bigger than yourself. That's why you got to know what's going on. You really have to understand the forces that work here. We're not about integrating the society. That's never been the goal. Never. We live our lives separate and apart from each other. We live in enclaves, like balkanized, groups all over. My wife and I often find ourselves in this weird position where people accuse us, and accuse is the right word, they accuse us of living in an all-white neighborhood. I just Brother blithely respond, but how can that be true? We live there. We're black. We're not white. How can it be all white? And what they're really saying, the true message is you have no right to be there because you're not white. That's the true message, but they won't say that. They're just talking
I
about all
understand.
neighborhoods, et cetera, et cetera. And even the residents in these places have similar thoughts. I mean, I can tell you this story. Do we have time for a story?
We do, if you allow us
It's,
another
it's,
10 minutes.
it's fine. I can go on forever. But
Okay.
the thing is, we were in Pasadena, California. By the way, and you need to know a little bit about the history of that place because it's one of the original sundown cities. You know, sundown cities, those are the cities
Yes.
where black and brown people could come in and work by day, but the sundown, they had to be gone out of there. Pasadena was one of those. It had sort of given that up on the surface by the time we moved there. This was 1988. So we had not lived in Pasadena ever. We were strangers. We knew nothing about the geography or the dynamics, but we liked the place. It looked good. So we hired a real estate agent on the advice of a friend who said she's really good. She was a young white woman, bubbly, perky, very personable, and she showed us a lot of houses. We saw house after house after house. But then, during this time, a couple of weeks, we were also driving around when we're not looking for houses. My wife and I were just getting acclimated. We see for sale signs all over the city, and yet we're only seeing houses in a certain section. So we think, well, maybe she's young, her portfolio is limited. We better, okay, so we fire her. We get another one similar, same result. Now lights go on. Okay, now we got a lot more information, right? So we fire that one. We resolve not to hire another one. We go out on our own, find this wonderful home, sign in the yard for sale, gives the agent's name, phone number. We call, we make an appointment, Wednesday, 10 o'clock. San Marino, California, right next door to Pasadena. We walk in, 9:55. We're a little early. We see a woman descending from the second floor. She's coming down the stairway. She's got a clipboard and she's got a smile. She's anticipating at 10 o'clock. She sees us. Her smile fades. She clutches that notebook tighter. She makes a U-turn. She runs back up the steps in her high heels. I said to my wife, that's our 10 o'clock. We need to follow her. Are you sure? Oh, yeah. We follow her to her cubicle. She's crouching down, but you can't hide in these cubicles. We present ourselves as the people interested in buying this property. Now, fortunately, the law is on our side. That may be one of these signs of progress people talk about, although I have some words to say about that business. But in any case, the law was there, right? So we buy the house. We move in. Day one, the movers are there, furniture's going in. The neighbor comes over. She's an older white woman. She runs over and she says, I want you to know I voted for you in the neighborhood watch council meeting. She's not even introduced herself yet. But we're happy. She seems to be an ally. So we say, great, love it. You voted for us. Now, what was this vote about? Well, the neighbors got together and they wanted to decide if they were going to support you being in the neighborhood. Support me being in the neighborhood. Well, one guy was reported as saying, well, they'll probably have Ray Charles over there with these loud music parties all night. I said, really? Does he know how to contact Ray Charles? Maybe we could. Well, you know how that goes. At any rate, we moved in, but it wasn't the most pleasant space. 10 years, we put up with that stuff. 10 years. At which point, and I think that what broke the straw that broke the camel's back, the house next door to us on the other side, the woman died and it was bought by some other people, and they moved in. My wife was convinced they were recently released convicts because they were really bad news. Okay, they beat women up, they had dogs, you know, and they talk about black people. Well, in any case, we moved and into another neighborhood, which has a story of its own, not as crazy as that one, but still in that category, right? So the thing is, that's why I'm saying that in this country, there is no real focus on trying to be an integrated society. The best we have been able to do is partially desegregate parts of it, but integration, no. That's just a pipe dream for some that is nowhere near the agenda of most people, nowhere near.
All right.
Because, just this final thing, in case you don't know this, is that the final fear has to do with sexuality and sex, you know. Co-mingling with folk will lead to such co-mingling of bodies And that's one of the real fears of white America. They do not want to be, moved out of existence because of the genetic stuff that goes on. Well, anyway, do your own reading about it. I don't have to tell you, right?
So, all right, I just love this conversation because it's getting more and more fascinating. So I have an official question to ask, but I'm going to ask you a follow-up to what you just mentioned because it'll maybe serve as incentive for folks to buy your book, which is on my bookcase right behind me. So this whole notion of mixing of the races and sexuality, can you talk a bit about the palm cards that were distributed at Central High School and your inability to actually participate in extracurricular activities for that very fear?
Oh, yeah. The school board told us in no uncertain terms that the only way this experiment can go forward is that if you agree not to participate in any extracurricular activities. Now, it was couched in terms of our safety. They said we couldn't guarantee your safety at these sports and other kinds of gatherings. And they were adamant. Now, we all knew the truth of the matter. The truth of the matter was they did not want for us as 9 Black students to have this opportunity to have social interaction with white kids. Because obviously, when you put kids together, especially if they haven't been totally soaked in racist ideology, they'll be open to discovering who other people are. And then there would be possibly some opportunities for folk to build relationships together, which could lead to having grandkids or that other people didn't want. I don't know. But it's not that far-fetched when you think about it. But that was the whole genesis for keeping us away from other kids, because they were able to maintain as much safety as possible, which, by the way, wasn't all good anyway. I mean, the Army was there. The U.S. Army was there for a time, but they were moved away, and then they were replaced by the newly federalized Arkansas State National Guard. Now, you can imagine some of those folk had mixed emotions about being there to protect us. And so that's another story altogether. But in fact, when you look at our history in terms of what we expect from each other as citizens, we have maintained that rigid line between black and white. We don't like it. We don't like it. We prefer not to have it. And again, it's all written down. You can look through the ages and see the lengths to which people will go to make that possible. I mean, we pass laws for housing, but those are routinely broken. And most of the deeds we have covenants involved where they're not to be sold to black people. But the law says you can't do that anymore. So but they do sell them, and they still have that covenant language in them. It's an interesting kind of thing. But if you don't have that, awareness, I'll give you an example. During the time I did psychology practice, I had a young couple come to me for advice about getting married. They were thinking of getting married. It's a black man and a white woman. And I listened to them, and they, expressed great love and affection for each other. And I said, well, what comments are you getting from your respective families? Oh, we haven't told them yet. Oh, okay. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to send you home, and you're going to talk to your families, and you come back next week, and then you tell me what happened. Following week, they come in. They look so bedraggled, so dismayed. What happened? Explosions on both sides. Right. Explosions on both sides. They did not anticipate that. I'm thinking, you have lived in America these 20 plus years, and you did not expect an explosion? Where have you been? They eventually decided not to marry. It's very, very interesting dynamic. I don't know how people can be that naive, to think that they can make choices without factoring in the responses from people that are part of their inner circle. Because it's not just you getting married, you're attaching yourself to another group of people, always, and forever, at least according to some rules, perhaps not so much anymore. People go through serial relationships. It's like having a new brand of something.
Yeah.
But there is some real lessons to be learned about who we are. And I think the first step is to know who you are, find out who you are. Because if you don't know who you are at the, really in-depth level, it's hard for you to operate in society with people. You'll constantly be getting fooled or tricked or duped. That's just one side of it. But on the other hand, once you find out who you are, you'll be able to withstand all that stuff and find out that there's really something good in most people if they're willing to open up and share with you, and you have the time. I mean, I find it delightful. I think one of the reasons I went into psychology, I'm so impressed with all people. Everybody has a story to tell. I mean, as a young psychologist, I'll never forget, I came home one Monday evening, after a very successful day in the office, and I told my wife, I know everything. I'm so well informed, or words to that effect. Tuesday, I came home, erase all that Monday stuff. I know nothing, because the Tuesday client had blown me away. I never heard anything like that. But it was a good wake-up call for me, because it took me off my perch. Then I was able to start learning, truly getting involved, learning about who I was and who these other people are and what happens at that intersection of me and them. You see, that's all very, very germane to being truly human in society, as I think. You have to know who you are. You have to know who the other people are. And you truly have to know what's likely to happen when those two intersect, you and these others. And by the way, just occurred to me, we were talking about miscegenation of all things.
Yes.
But there is no such thing as race. Never has been.
Right.
Biologically, scientifically,
Right.
the myth was exploded years ago, and yet we cling to it. It is legally possible in this world, in this country, for a white female to give birth to a black baby. It is not possible for a black female to give birth to a white baby. Very interesting, right? Sort of the oddities of the whole racial thing. But in truth, there is no such thing as race. It's all made up. It's mythological. And yet, we have bought it. We, the collective we. In fact, if you go out on the street and do a quick on-the-street interview, are you a member of a so-called race? Well, you don't even have to say that. Are you a member of a racial group? Yes, and I'm proud of it. You may get that more often than not. Some people are beginning to understand that that's one of the ways in which the powers that be keep us in check by assigning us racial group categories. I had a client, well, not a client, it was a member of a group I was dealing with. She raised her hand, Dr. Roberts, would you prefer to be called Black or African American? And she sat back because she'd asked this very profound question and she was just waiting for the answer, right?
And you said?
I didn't say anything. And after a while, she looked a bit discomforted and she said, well, aren't you going to answer? I said, well, yeah, I was just waiting for more options. You've given me very limited options. Come on, what else have you got? She didn't have anything. I suggested that she call me Terry Roberts. That's what I work for you. She was not sure. She was assured that I fit in one of those categories.
Right.
I was either Black or I was African American. I could think of 100 different categories I could possibly wedge myself into if I wanted to. But the fact is, I'm Terry Roberts. Temporarily. Why temporarily? Because that name I have is not the African name I probably should have. And I keep listening for it. And one day I'll hear it and I'll respond because that's my name. I will know me when I hear me.
I love it. I have to go to one of the questions in the chat, and this kind of takes us back to diversity, equity, inclusion, desegregation, integration. The statement is, it's one thing to admit students, the other is to help them survive. What are your suggestions?
Well, I think, like we got into Central, you have to be aware of where you're going. We realized that we weren't going to be integrated into the society at Central. No, that's because that's not where we are as a country. So kids going into these places have to know this in advance. And no matter how posh a place, and no matter how welcoming it may seem, there will be lines that you cannot cross. But nobody will tell you what those lines are until you cross them, and then you'll suffer the consequences. But you truly have to know this and not be upset or dismayed about it, because it's not about you,
Right.
It's about other people and what they're doing. But if you really feel good about you can deal with that. I'll never forget reading some years ago, Black Ice by Lorraine Carey. she's a wonderful, I haven't read anything else if she's ever written it, but I love that book, Black Ice. She's writing about she and her young brother who were at this posh private school, and somebody asked her, "Why are you here?" And she said, "I'm here to turn this place out." I just love it for the one line in the book. That was it for me. I said, yes, I will reread this one, turn it out. And you have that option. And you don't have to do much to turn it out either. You just have to ask some delicate questions. Why this and why not that? But people forget that you don't have to resolve all the problems at once. That's another thing I caution young people about. You can't change this stuff overnight. It's not going to happen. But what you can do is commit to yourself to being the best you possible. That is, knowing full well what your strengths are and your weaknesses, and find a balance so that you're not thrown off balance by others. Because if you're in that situation and others throw you off balance, you're at a disadvantage. You need to be willing to learn how to navigate the racial divide, the racial terrain with ease and comfort. And you can do it because other people cannot define who you are without your participation. You define who you are. It's like I know I'm Terry Roberts.
Right.
One middle school kid asked me, who was your best friend growing up? Didn't take me long to answer. Terry Roberts. I mean, I knew this, right? I'm my best friend. I have other friends too, but I can count on this one.
Yeah. Dr. Roberts, we are ever so appreciative of your time and the wisdom that you shared with us this afternoon. You will indeed have the final words. What is it that you want us to take home or take out of the home and implement in the world?
Well, there's a phrase from a poem written by Eloise Klein Healy, former colleague of mine. Eloise writes this. She says, if what you know hasn't changed you, by all means, change what you know. And I say, let's do it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We really, really, really appreciate this. And I will look for the email from you with the suggested reading list. I know some individuals put in the chat, they wanted to know what happened to the rest of the Little Rock Nine. For those of you who are not Illinois Tech students, faculty, or alumni, one of the Little Rock Nine pursued her advanced degrees from Illinois Tech and graduated. That would be Gloria Ray Karlmark. So we will include in the recommended reading list information about the others and their speakers bureaus and other organizations that you may search out and find out more about them. So again, if we can flood the Zoom page with hearts in appreciation for Dr. Roberts. Go to your reactions button and put one that encapsulates your feelings. It's hearts for me, and
Wow.
I'm sure it's hearts for our administration as well.
That's pretty cool. I didn't even know that was possible. By the way, there are 7 of us of the group of 9 who remain above ground. Jeff Thomas died about 12 years ago, but the rest of us are still around. And thank you for allowing me to be here with you. And we'll see you later.
You are most welcome. Have a good day, all.